Hey there, Scott Sambucci here, and it is time for post-race part 2, startup lessons from the trail. I'll keep the introduction short so we can just dive right in. If you've missed any of the previous installments, both prior to and now after the Western States 100 Ultramarathon that I ran recently, I've just been collecting a lot of thoughts and ideas and strategies around all of the ultramarathon running and training that I do and how that relates to running a startup, growing a startup. So much of what you're doing as you move from idea to impact with your company is really a very long journey. It's an ultramarathon in a lot of ways. There's peaks and valleys, there's ups and downs, lots of obstacles in the way, lots of work that needs to be done that nobody ever sees in order to accomplish and get to the place that you want to go. So as I've been learning from my experiences, I want to just share those learnings with you so that perhaps there's something in here that will help you and your team as a startup CEO to grow and scale and take some of these lessons that I've learned from the trail and translate those into the work that you're doing each and every day on your journey with your startup. So what I'm going to do is just jump down to in this second post-race installment. Again, I did a number of these LinkedIn Lives and podcasts prior to the race. Sort of pre-race lessons from the trail, and now post-race I've been reflecting back on the race itself and documenting some post-race additional lessons from the trail. So in the first three post-race lessons that I talked about, number one was simply finding experts. So how do you find people that are going to help you learn the unknown unknowns, help you become more competent, and really help you push in the places that you need to push in order to be successful. So that was lesson number one. Lesson number two was do the work. So now that you have a plan, now that you have a strategy, now you know exactly what you need to do, then you've got to do the work. You got to do not just the work, but you got to do the right work in order to get to where you want to go. And then finally, the third lesson that I talked about in part one was prepare, plan, and visualize. So get a plan in place, know exactly what you need to do, visualize the outcome that you want to get to, and make sure that you're preparing every single day for every step along the way in that journey. So we're going to start here today in today's podcast and today's LinkedIn Live with lesson number 4. So let's talk about that, lesson number 4. And this is, could be one of the hardest things to learn, but one of the most important, which is the way I frame it is focus on your locus. Focus on your locus. So in some of the past podcasts, I talked about not just finishing the race in the 30 hours that were allocated to every runner. I also wanted to finish the race in under 24 hours, which is considered a pretty hefty cutoff time. It's pretty tough to finish 100 miles within 24 hours, and particularly on this course, given the amount of the ups and downs, the elevation changes of 18,000 feet of climbing, 22,000 feet of descent, lots of heat out there because we're running this race at the end of June. So there's a lot of things that you've got to think through, like what is in your control and what's not in your control. So I'll give you a couple of examples here. So specifically, one of the things I did is, as a kind of a data guy, and even when it comes to ultramarathons, there's a lot of data out there. And one of the things that I did is I looked at the past 20 years of the races that have been run here in the Western States 100. And they've got some good data about how many people started the race, how many finished the race, and how many finished the race in under 24 hours. So if you're actually watching this on LinkedIn or you're watching this later on YouTube, you can see I've got some highlighted years here, and you can see some of the years in 2017. The sub 24 hour finishing time was about 20%. In 2009 it was 18%. In 2006 it was 13%. In the year 2000 it was 16%. All the other years was over 20%, and actually in the last 10 years the average has been over 30%, meaning over 30% of the racers that started the race finished in under 24 hours. So for me, that was like an initial benchmark to ask myself, like, hey, am I going to be able to be in that top 25 or 30% of racers? And even further, thinking about it, in case it was going to be a really hot year, which it was this year, could I get myself down to a time that would make me a top 20%, meaning like 1 out of 4? That means I'm faster than 4 out of 5 other racers out there. So that's a pretty high standard, right? And so one of the ways that when I talk about focus on your locus is going back to the training that you do and making sure that you're prepared as possible, and really strengthen yourself and get ready to be able to run fast enough to get to that pace. There's some other data out there just to show you how serious people in the ultra running community take this. There's actually a paper that was published called The Statistical Guide to a Silver Buckle. So what that means is that the silver buckle is what you get if you finish in under 24 hours. If you finish in under 30 hours, you get a bronze buckle. It's kind of the trophy, if you will, for finishing the race. And so there's actually a fellow who, for the 2017 race, actually documented all of the people who ran the race, those who finished in under 24 hours, and what were their checkpoint times along the way. So of course, along the 100-mile course, there are certain aid stations, and you get your time stamped at each of those aid stations. So you can follow every racer and figure out how fast do you need to run and when do you need to be at certain checkpoints in order to get there. So this is all the data that I've been looking at going into the race and setting this sub 24-hour goal for myself, and saying to myself, what out there is possible, for me. What do I need to do in order to accomplish and be one of those top 20% of racers out there in order to earn that silver buckle? And so as this relates to startups, and I'll bring this around to the race itself, there's a great quote that I heard years ago from Vinod Khosla. So you might recognize his name from Vinod Khosla from Khosla Ventures. And I heard him at a conference called FailCon probably about 7-8 years ago. He was a guest there. And I remember one of the things that he talked about, which is the luck factor when it comes to startups. And a lot of times we don't like the fact that there's luck involved in our success or in our failure. We want to obviously root out all of the variables and try to rid ourselves of any chances of bad luck. And on the other hand, we don't want to rely on good luck in order to hit our goals. We don't want to say we did what we can and then we're just going to hope for the best. We're always out there as founders of companies trying to grow and scale. You're always trying to remove variables, because when you remove variables, then you're essentially creating a scenario where you're in control of as much as possible. So there's that word control and how it is related to focus on your locus. And so the quote, I found this on Twitter recently where he restated a version of the quote, which is, I always tell startups to hang on long enough to give luck a chance. If there are 10 factors in success, 5 depend on what you do, 3 depend on luck, and 2 on your competitors. And I think that's really important for us to all understand as you're growing and running your company, because there are certain factors that we do need to be in control of. It's hitting your product sprints, building the product that the market needs, going out and doing the sales work that needs to happen every day, hiring and recruiting the right people, raising capital. There's a lot of things that are somewhat in our control. And then there's the factors of the competitors. Of what are your competitors going to do? When your competitors go one way, do you follow them, or do you when they shift left, do you go right? And does that help you improve your chances in some ways? Or are you going faster than them because they're not fast enough in the marketplace to respond to customer needs, as an example? But these other 3 out of the 10 factors are all luck. And so when I think about this idea, this lesson of focus on your locus, when you're out there on the trail, there's a lot of things that are in your control. I can control my training. I can control how much work I put in. I can control my nutrition. I can control, even on the course, am I drinking enough water? Am I taking enough salt? Am I eating enough calories? These are all things that I can control, right? I can control my pace to make sure I don't go too fast and make sure I don't go too slow in a certain section. I can prepare and make sure that I know the course, so that certain parts of the course that might seem like a downhill on paper, when you get out there and you realize it's really rocky terrain or it's really unstable footing, so you can't go downhill as fast as you would like to, or certain uphills that you feel like, man, that doesn't look so steep, maybe I can make up a little time here and hike fast, or even run up some of those uphills, and then you realize it's more steep than I thought. I can't actually run any of this. I have to walk the whole thing, and that's really going to slow me down. That's a way of removing a variable by simply knowing the course. So when I was preparing for this race and even executing on my race plan throughout the course of the day, there are certain things that are in your control every single day, in my control every single day, and in the weeks and the months preparing for this race. Now there's other things that are not in my control that really depend on luck. And a big factor of luck in finishing in under 24 hours comes down to the weather, and specifically how hot is it going to be on that day of the race? And so the reason I specifically highlighted some of the years over the last 20 years here on the race history is that those years where there was a slow or a lower number of sub 24-hour finishers. So we look at 2017, 2009, when there was 18% of the finishers were under 24 hours. Those were particularly hot years. So 2009 specifically was a year where the race day heat was hitting 100 degrees. So you're out there in the middle of these canyons and the heat gets trapped down in there. There's no breeze. It's very stifling. You're climbing up these long inclines, these long hills, getting up and down these canyons, and it's just going to slow you down, right? Your body heat is going to be higher. That forces you to go a little slower so you don't burn up too much energy and you don't burn yourself out. So there's, a lot of ways, it's better to run in cool weather, in cooler weather. And if I look at 2018 and 2019, those were years that the weather was actually very cooperative. And you can see, if you're watching this, you can see that the sub 24-hour rate in 2019 was 35%. So over 1/3 of the runners that completed the race actually finished in under 24 hours. It's almost double what it is in a hot year. And that was 2019 was a notoriously cool year. It was only in the 80s that day, as compared to hitting 100 degrees like it was in 2009. And so going into the race, one of the things I'm of course checking, the days going into the race is like, what's the weather going to be like? We get very hot days out here in the Sacramento Valley, and we get some days that are actually relatively cool for the middle of the summer, cool meaning in the 80s and 90s. And unfortunately, on race day, for me, what they were predicting is temperatures that were going to hit 99, 100, and some forecasts show it as 100, as high as 104 degrees that day. So immediately what that meant to me was that I couldn't just be one of the top 30% of runners. I was going to have to be one of the top 20 or even one of the top 18% of runners in order to, at least from a historical data, in order to hit that sub 24-hour time. Now I could sit and complain about the weather, but that's not in my control. It's not in my locus of control. So the only thing I could do is focus on the things that I knew I was able to remove as variables. I knew I trained really well. I knew I had a good hydration strategy. I knew I had a nutrition strategy. I knew how to manage the heat because I'd been out there training on those trails. So there's things I could control and there's things I could not control, and the weather being one of them. And so for you, when you're running your startup, there's going to be some factors, as Vinod Khosla had talked about, there's going to be some factors, 3 out of 10 of the factors related to your success are probably going to be based on luck. They could be macroeconomic conditions, whether those are things like pandemics or global slowdowns in the macroeconomy. They could be factors in your industry. Maybe your industry gets hit particularly hard, or maybe there's some new rules or regulations that come into play that you weren't expecting to happen. We had this in the housing market when I was at Blend. It was right after the housing crash in 2008, 2009. There's all these rules and regulations and new compliance standards that all of the banks and lenders had to hit. And that shifted the entire marketplace when it came to mortgages, how mortgages were originated, the levels of disclosure, what banks had to do, the software they were allowed to use. And in our case, that was a lucky break in some ways with Blend because we were able to, we started the company after the housing crash. So we were starting with fresh software that could be built around these rules and compliance requirements. Whereas older companies had legacy software and they had to figure out how to re-engineer their platforms in order to make sure they were able to comply with these rules and regulations. That was something that worked really well in our favor from a luck standpoint. So you just need to keep this in mind, and I think it's important to share this with your team and make sure that your team is clear on like what are those factors that are in your control and what are those factors that might not be in your control, and how do you shift and adapt. Or as one of my favorite quotes is from Bruce Lee, which is a paraphrase of it, which is like, be like water, is what he says, or what he said. When water is flowing downhill through rocks and trees and roots and grass and dirt, right? Water flows based on whatever, if there's an obstruction, water just moves around it. And so when you have these factors that come in that are out of your control, that pop up in front of you, these obstructions or these obstacles, then you have to, in a lot of ways, be like water and just know, okay, like this is just an unlucky break. So how we respond to it is more important than what that obstacle is sitting in front of us. So this is a big lesson for me going into the race to help reduce my anxiety, just saying like, it was bad luck that it was going to be 100 degrees that day, or perhaps even hotter based on some forecasts. And I could choose to be bummed about that and feel like, well, that's not fair, or I could just say, hey, that just means I need to do even better with my hydration and salt intake. I need to do even better with my calories. I need to manage my pace in the hot parts of the day and make sure I save up enough energy so when it gets cool at night that I can run a little bit faster in order to make up some time. So that's my first lesson for today in this post-race installment, part 2, which is focus on your locus. Focus on your locus. So lesson number 5 and part number 2 for today, and number 5 in these 10 lessons from the trail is be confident. Right? So, if you think about these lessons, they all kind of start stacking on each other. Like, when you work with experts and you get the right plan in place and you start focusing on your locus of, focusing on what's in your control, at the end of the day, like, you've done the work. Like, if you've done the work, you've had the right plan, you've prepared, you've executed, you're focusing on the right things, then at some point you just need to say, like, I've done everything I can do. I've done everything possible, and you need to go forward with confidence. Because when you're going to go do something hard, like an ultramarathon, yeah, it's okay to have some anxiety. I think that's a good thing. I have anxieties before every sales call I do, even after doing enterprise sales and teaching people sales for 25 years. I still feel a level of nerves or anxiety because I want the call to go well. I want to be able to help people. On the other hand, I know, like, hey, what we've built here at the company really helps early stage startups. And I know I've prepared for that meeting, and I know I've prepared and built a system, a coaching program that can really help the right kind of startup founder. And so going into that call, I tell myself, be confident, because you can help that person if they want the kind of help that you're offering. And the same goes when you're running this race. So, right here is a picture of me pre-race. What they do is they take a picture of you prior to the race with your bib number. It was bib number 315. And I remember, you go to the race check-in the day before. So the race starts at 5 a.m. on Saturday morning. And so Friday, they do the pre-race check-in. So you check in, you get your bib number, you get a wristband that you have to keep on throughout the course of the race, which just has some emergency information in case something happens to you and they need to contact an emergency contact of yours. And then they also do a pre-race meeting. So they just do an all-runner meeting, lasts about an hour. They just kind of go through the last set of details, the rules, the requirements, where can you pick up pacers, what to expect out there on the course, those kinds of things. And I remember that day really vividly because I remember thinking, and if you're watching this, you can see I'm wearing a t-shirt, a Superman t-shirt. It's one of my favorite shirts, if not my favorite shirt, because my son gave it to me for Father's Day a few years ago. So every time I do the laundry, that's almost always the first off the pile that I put on. And I purposely wore this shirt that day because I wanted to feel this level of confidence. I knew that I'd done a lot of the work. I'd done as much as I could do. I couldn't look back over the last 6 months and feel like, say to myself, man, I wish I would have done more. Like I did everything that I reasonably could have done to prepare and train and come into this race, and I felt good. So if you look at this picture of me, I feel like when I look at this picture, I see a level of confidence. Not just a level of happiness and joy, like, hey, I'm in this experience, but I feel confident, like, hey, I'm out there and I'm gonna execute on this race. Here's another picture I took of myself, a selfie that morning, which is just in front of the starting gate, about 19 hours before we hit, before the gun goes off the next morning. And again, like, I'm sitting in front of this gate and I was just imagining, like, hey, tomorrow morning it's 5 a.m. and that gun's gonna go off and I'm gonna start this journey. And I'm gonna go after the sub 24-hour goal. I'm going to both go after finishing the race, but also go hard at this sub 24-hour goal. And I felt confident. And in the pre-race meeting, there's a picture of the pre-race meeting. It's just a big open area with people sitting outside. And as I was walking through Olympic Village and looking at some of the other racers, I wasn't necessarily like saying to myself, am I faster than that person? Am I faster than this person over here? But what I was asking myself is, like, this is the population. This is the sample size. These are the people, the 300 plus athletes that are going to be towing the line tomorrow. And I had to ask myself, like, am I in the top 20% here? And I felt pretty confident, like, based on my training and based on my training times and based on all of the work that I'd done, I felt confident, like, yeah, I think I am in one of the top 25% of the racers out here. I feel really confident. And that really helped my psyche going into the race. And I feel like that's an important lesson for startups, because oftentimes, like, think about when you're in sales calls and you're a CEO, you're a founder of a company, and you're talking to another executive on the other side of the table. Maybe it's the CEO of the company you're selling to. Maybe it's one of their vice presidents, executive vice presidents, one of their C-level executives. And I know this from working with our clients over the years, and helping hundreds of startups in their sales calls and helping them prepare and help them build their sales systems. A lot of times as a founder, you can sometimes feel this level of being unconfident, where you say, like, I'm just a CEO of this small startup, and this person across the table is some big executive at some big company. And I think it's really critical for you to tell yourself, like, look, I'm a CEO and I've started this company and we're on a mission and I have a vision. And I know that this company on the other side, sure, they might have been in business for 100 years and they might have a 40,000 person workforce, and this executive across the table might have 25 years of experience. But I know my product, and I know the problem we solve, and I know the customers that we have are having a wonderful levels of success using our product. So when it comes time to run that sales call, you've got to be confident. Because when you're selling your solution to their problem, you've got to do it with confidence. You've got to say, look, this is what we've built. We know this thing works. We built this specifically to solve this kind of problem. And the more confident you are, then the higher the chances are that you're gonna transfer that enthusiasm, you're gonna transfer that confidence over to the person on the other side. Because if you're not confident, you're like, I don't know, I'm a little worried. If you're selling yourself, if your self-talk is that of worry, if your self-talk is that of feeling like you're not good enough, or you're not big enough, or it's not, the platform still has lots of bugs, then the person on the other side is going to feel that lack of confidence, right? Zig Ziglar, years ago, I used to listen to Zig Ziglar audio cassette tapes in my car when I was doing sales calls 25 years ago, in between sales calls. And what he talked about all the times is that sales is, you can oftentimes think of sales as a transfer of enthusiasm. So the more enthusiastic, the more confident you are, as long as, of course, your product does what you say it's going to do, and you know that you can solve the problem that the customer has, then that gives you the right to be confident. And frankly, your prospect, your customer, deserves to feel that confidence from you, because they're the ones sitting there with the problem that needs to be solved. And that problem that they have is, maybe it's $1 million problem, maybe it's a $10 million problem, maybe it's a $100 million problem for that one company. And they're the one looking for the solution. If you're the one that can help them solve that problem, you've got to walk in there with confidence. You've got to walk in there with enthusiasm and say, I think we can do this for you, and show them the path forward on how you can make that happen for them. So this lesson of, being confident, I think, is so critical when you're out there running the company. And again, you can't just do it with bravado and do it with vaporware and just talk for the sake of talking. Like, you've got to be able to back it up. But when you can back it up, and you've got the product, and you've got the solution that can help this prospect, then be confident. If you've done the planning, you've done the preparation, you've done the work, be confident. Okay? So that's my second lesson for today, number 5 in this list. So the last thing I'm going to ask, the last lesson I'm going to share today, number 6 on my list, is ask for help. Ask for help. I'm going to take a quick pause, take a sip of my coffee. Which, by the way, if you're watching this on LinkedIn or on YouTube, you see I'm sitting outside. I'm out in front of a coffee shop, which is not Phil's Coffee, which is my favorite coffee shop back home. Actually traveling right now up in Portland, visiting some family, so doing some work from the coffee shop here. So number 6, ask for help. So many times as entrepreneurs, we've got this mindset, and it's one of the things that helps us the most. Something I alluded to earlier with lesson number 1, find experts, where like we have this mindset where we're undaunted and we're going to go out there and do this. We're going to step out there on the ledge and we're going to do things on our own. That's one of the things that make you an entrepreneur. You're cut from a different cloth. But to really execute on the mission and vision of your company, and for me to execute on, winning, or not necessarily not winning, but to finish this race and to finish it under 24 hours, I was going to need help. I needed help, and not just help from my wife, who obviously I've got tons of help from her over the months and years, where she supports me in the training and the time and the effort that goes into these things, where she is running crew and, sleeping in the back of a pickup truck, waiting for me to show up at some aid station at midnight, or waiting for me to show up at the finish line at 5 o'clock in the morning. That's help from my immediate team, my wife and my son. I'm asking for their help. It's also asking for help of outside people. And so for me, a couple different ways where I was able to ask for and get help is, number one, with pacers. So in a race, in these longer races, you can usually have what are called pacers, people that will run with you on the trail. And in this particular race, you're allowed to have a pacer starting at mile 62. So once you get to a place called Forest Hill, you're through about 2/3 of the race. You've got about 1/3 of the race to go. At that point, the race allows you to have somebody who can run with you. This is both for safety reasons, because at that point, most runners are going to be running through the night to get to the finish line. So there's some safety issues there. Most of the runners are now strung out pretty far along the course. You've got 300 runners over 100 miles. Everybody running different paces, from the 14 and a half hours that finish the winning time finisher finished at, all the way through to people that are coming in at 30 hours, nearly double the time or over double the time. So you got pretty strewn out set of runners on the course. So there's some safety factors, and it's also, I think, from a mental standpoint, you've had, in my case anyway, getting into Forest Hill at close to 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. You've now been running for 15 hours, right? There's a lot of mental grind that goes into that. So having some company on the trail is a big thing. And not only that, just getting somebody to keep you moving. And so for me, I chose to have two pacers, one pacer from Forest Hill down to a place called The River, a place called Ruckychuck. It's about a 16-mile stretch. And so it's a picture of my friend Dan Garcia, who's a big mountain biker, but also does some running on the trails and actually lives out there in Auburn, so knows these trails really, really well. And the second person is my friend Jen, who is a fantastic runner. She is very fast, very strong, and so she's part of our running club in Davis. So I didn't really even know Jen all that well, just through the running club and different meetings. But I sent her an email and said, "Hey Jen, listen, this is what I'm thinking. Would you be up for pacing me in the last 20 miles of this race from Green Gate to the finish? I could really use somebody strong to pull me on those last 20 miles where I need to be moving pretty quickly in order to have a chance at the sub 24-hour time." And in both cases, both of these people were like, "Yeah, sure, happy to do it. I'm excited to do it." And they actually told me they were honored to be asked, which is just amazing, because these are two people that are going to be running, 20 miles, 18 miles, 20 miles just to help me. And they're going to be doing this at night. Dan's got a son at home. He's got his wife, so he's like, "Hey, I'm going to meet this guy Scott out at 7, 8 o'clock at night. We're going to run until about midnight on a Saturday night." And Jen, she's got her partner at home. She's training for a race herself because she's like I said, a great runner. And now she's going to put herself out there and meet me at midnight and run with me until 5 o'clock in the morning through the night. And we don't even know each other that well. It's just amazing when you ask for help, what kind of help you're going to get. Same thing with just even little things throughout the race. So one of the training runs I wanted to do was a organized run from this place called Green Gate, which is mile 80 on the course, through to the finish line, so the last 20 miles of the course. So the race did an organized run about a month ahead of the race. And my friend Katie was also going to be doing this run, but we needed a ride to get to the start place. You can't just leave your car there. It's in a kind of remote location. You can't just drive there and leave your car and then run 20 miles and then how are you going to get back to get your car? So I knew Katie was going to be doing this, and I said, "Katie, how are you getting to Green Gate on this training day?" And she said, "Oh, my aunt lives in Auburn. She said that she would give me a ride out there. Happy to give you a ride as well." And so here's this my friend of mine, Katie, whose aunt is going to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, take Katie and I, drive us 35, 40 minutes out to this remote location just so she can drop us off so we can run back to Auburn 20 miles and do this training run. This is a total stranger to me, this Katie's aunt, and she was happy to do it. I can't put into words how grateful I am for that one. And for her, it seemed like, oh, no big deal, happy to do it. But for me, it meant everything, because that meant I could run the last 20 miles of the course in training and be ready for it. Getting into the race, so race weekend, my wife was going to drive up with me on Thursday. We're going to stay a couple nights up at the Squaw Valley Lodge. And so her work kind of threw her a curveball, and her work schedule just wasn't working out. And so now I'm like, well, how am I going to get up to the race start? Like, I can drive up there on my own, but then we're going to leave my car 100 miles away from the finish of the race. And they were like, how you're going to have to drive back up the mountain and get it somehow after I've been running through the night 100 miles. Like, how am I going to get to the race start? So my friend Kelly, who's also doing the race, started texting with him, asking where he was staying, where he, when was he going up. And it turns out he's like, hey man, if you need a ride up there, happy to do it, just jump in. And just offered that ride and was able to get me up to the race start. And it was a huge save for me and for my wife, so that she could get her work done. I could get a ride to the start. We didn't have to leave a car. And that way my wife could just focus on her work, making sure my son got to summer camp. And then I was going to meet them on Saturday afternoon in the middle of the race at Forest Hill. So these are just like examples of like little ways along the way, along the journey. And there's so many more little examples of this where you're just going to need help. You're just going to need help if you're going to be successful in the mission and the vision and the outcome that you want to get to. So, wherever you are in your journey as a startup founder, and if it's in the case in sales, for example, like maybe you've gotten those first customers, you've got that first revenue in the door, and you've proven you're starting to move towards product market fit, and you're not sure how to build more repeatability and scalability into your sales process. Well, that's a place to ask for help. And obviously that's something that we do here at SalesQualia every single day. But it's not just in sales. It could be around hiring. Like how do you know how to hire the right salespeople? Maybe you're hiring your first sales VP. How are you vetting out that sales VP to make sure they're the right person for your company, for the job that needs to be done for you over the next 2, 3, 4 years? Asking for help to find the right person. It could be asking for help and finding somebody on the product side to mentor you and mentor your product team or your engineering team. Asking for help, with your investors, with your advisors. Asking for introductions. A lot of times we feel like, oh, we don't want to burden people by asking them for help. Most people, in my experience, if you ask them for help, they actually want to help. They get happiness from being asked to help and offering that help. So oftentimes you're actually giving them the opportunity to help. By giving them the opportunity to help you, you're actually allowing them to feel a level of happiness and joy that they otherwise would not have experienced. So I think it's really important to, number one, if you're feeling a little bit of ego and you feel like you got to do it yourself and be a DIY person, number one, you just got to drop that and be willing to ask for help. And then number two, be willing to go out there and just ask for help from lots of different people, even if they're not close confidants to you or they're close contacts of yours. In the case of Jen, she was just somebody who was someone who I knew from the running club, and yet now we have this friendship where she and I ran through the night 20 miles for over 5 hours, and she pulled me through to got me to the finish line. And the same with Dan. Dan is now, he's already somebody who I consider a friend, but going through that experience together was really amazing. And getting that help from someone like him, I would not have been able to go as fast as I was able to go those last 40 miles, the last 38 miles of the race without Jen and Dan, and certainly would not have been able to even do the race without the help of my wife. So that's it for now. I think this is a good place to stop. When I talk about these startup lessons from the trail, these are all then these post-race installments are ones that, as I said, just reflecting back and looking at the lessons I've learned over the last months, training and obviously doing this race, completing this race. The last installment that I'll do, I'll probably just do the third installment. I'll do the last 4 lessons in one fall swoop, and I'll talk more about what it took to get to the finish line and whether or not I hit the sub 24-hour time I was looking for, because it's a good story, and I don't think you're going to want to miss it. So, like I said, this last lesson, ask for help, just coincidentally finishing up here with this particular episode. I do want to encourage you to ask for help, find experts. And again, if you're sitting there, you're running a startup, and it's particularly on the sales side of things, you're trying to figure out how to get more repeatability, you want to get more scalability in your sales process, you want to get more predictability, wherever you are in that journey. If you're sub $1 million, you're trying to get to that first $1 million in revenue, maybe you push past that $1 million barrier, and now it's the race to 3 and then 10. Maybe you just close a Series A or closing in on a Series A, and you know that's going to mean lots of changes for you and your team and how you're going to get some scalability in your sales process. These are all things that we help with every single day with all of our clients at SalesQualia. We've helped hundreds of startups over the years to solve those exact problems. So if you want to get some help on that, just shoot me if you're watching this on LinkedIn, you can shoot me a DM or just type the word journey in the comments below. You're also welcome to send me an email. My email address is Scott, SCOTT, at SalesQualia, QUALIA.com, Scott@SalesQualia.com. Just type the word private into the subject, or you can type the word journey into the subject. Just let me know you want to have a quick chat. Take a look at your situation, brainstorm some ideas, and figure out if or how the team and I here at SalesQualia can help you ramp up and scale up your sales, get more predictability and scalability, repeatability and scalability in your sales process. So, all right, I think it's a good place to call it a day. Thanks so much for listening. This is Scott Sambucci signing off.